Welcome back to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon, the podcast where we dive deep into the lives and journeys of incredible individuals from all walks of life. I'm your host, Dr. Frances Mei Hardin, and today we have an exciting guest who's made major waves in the world of pop culture commentary. Morgan Paige, the personality behind Morgan's Pop Talks, is here to share her insights into building and thriving in a competitive career and the glamorous world of celebrity news and pop culture. You may be wondering, why a pop culture expert? Because, surgeon is in the title of the show. Of course, we have had a ton of healthcare worker specific types of conversations on here. But really, as we're broadening the scope of these conversations and also realizing that, borrowing from other disciplines, gleaning what we can from experts in a ton of fields, not just healthcare, in the hospital setting, building on all of that is really what has led us to, connect with and bring on brilliant people of many walks of life. I also want to kind of set the stage and say that pop culture as a hobby is very much a real thing for some of us. When I think back to residency and some of my lowest moments of my life, I do think that there was an element of, making it to the next Monday because The Bachelor would be showing and I had my brackets. I had something to look forward to, that there was news to follow. Things like that, even though they seem like small or silly to some people, I really don't think it's that small or silly at all. And so not only in my own life and career has pop culture and, this whole area of entertainment and media been a source of, joy and certainly some levity during a long journey. But I also wanted to call out and bring up here one of my favorite recent headlines, which was from an interview with a gentleman who is touted as having the world's highest IQ. So Mr. Kim, 35-year-old gentleman from Korea, has the world's highest recorded IQ at 276. So again, just so everyone's on the same page here, the average IQ is considered around 100 and the threshold for genius starts at 140. So, they have an interview with this gentleman, again, highest IQ in the world, and he's an academic. He has expertise in neuroscience and biomedical engineering. And what I love is this quote from him. I love news and stories from the celebrity and entertainment worlds because it helps a lot with my anxiety. I believe that celebrities and the entertainment industry are harnessing our culture and their content is so intriguing for me. They're the ones that are entertaining all of us. They are artists, so I think in a way learning about their lives is a form of art experience. It's an escape for me as well, but also a source of inspiration. Moving on to another part of his interview, he also shares the quote, not only are the celebrities really creative, they're also helping us think of new ideas and new ways to express ourselves. And it helps us become more motivated to become better versions of ourselves. And pop culture never stops. So I really, the attention-grabbing headlines have been world's smartest man loves gossip. But yeah, there's more to it than that, and I'm very excited to get into it today. Allow me to formally introduce our guest. Morgan Paige is a dynamic social media personality and podcast host, known for her authentic takes on all things pop culture. With a decade of experience in broadcast journalism, she has interviewed Bravo Lebs, Bachelor Nation favorites, Survivor legends, and A-list musicians and actors, cementing her reputation as a trusted voice in the entertainment world. Morgan's personal story is just as compelling. She is married to her first love after spending 7 years on different continents. An avid traveler, she has explored destinations like London, Paris, Barcelona, South Africa, Greece, and more. At home, she's a proud dog mom to Harley, her beloved companion and constant source of joy. Morgan, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Well, to dive right in, your podcast and show, Morgan's Pop Talks, has such a loyal following. Can you start by telling all of us how you initially got into pop culture commentary and what really inspired you to build this whole brand?
I kind of fell into my whole career on accident, honestly, on multiple different occasions. I have a degree in broadcast journalism, but I didn't really know specifically what lane I wanted to go in whenever I graduated from college. I thought I would be doing local news, hard news, but I quickly found out that that wasn't the right path for me while I was actually still in school. So I needed an internship before I graduated, and it's very unlike me to wait to do things for the last second, but for some reason I waited until the last second to do that internship, and I was kind of scrambling for one, and I randomly ended up getting one on a morning show in my local hometown, top 40 station. So we were playing Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, and it was very pop culture centric. And I quickly fell in love with it. One thing kind of led to another, and I stayed in radio for 10 years doing different shifts, midday shifts, moving stations. My final pivot before leaving that industry was I was a co-host on a morning show here in Cleveland for 6 years. And it was my job on that show to do the pop culture reporting. So that's really where I learned all my skills on how to storytell and how to make things quick and efficient and digestible to listeners or watchers. But it wasn't until the pandemic, when I was stuck at home broadcasting from home, that I really learned what a powerful tool social media was. At that point, TikTok really wasn't what it is today. It wasn't necessarily seen as a place for people to build businesses and personal brands. But honestly, I was just so bored during the pandemic. I would get off work at 10 a.m., working on a morning show, and then I'd have nothing to do. So I would just watch TV all day. And one day I was like, what's this TikTok thing all about? Like, I guess I'll just start posting some things on there. And I started talking about the housewives, and it very quickly started to pick up traction. And one thing grew from there. I never came into it with the idea that I would have my own podcast or create these social media accounts that have, I don't know if you would call it larger, a substantial following, right? Where people are following along and waiting for my takes. But it's been a real blessing. And yes, it is work. I know people look at content creators and sometimes give them the side eye, but it's fun work. So I really am blessed to have ended up where I am now.
No, I love that. And obviously, no, I think it's real work. And, I get asked to make like one TikTok every 3 weeks, and they drag me kicking and screaming, doing it the whole time. So not only that, but I'm glad that you touched on that skill, which obviously you had the background in radio. You had really honed like getting to the heart of the story, being able to then convey that to other people online in a way that captures their attention. I mean, like, that is such an art form. So maybe people underestimate that. One thing that I loved about your story that reminds me a lot of like different journeys that we talk about with healthcare workers, things like that, is that, for instance, a few weeks ago, we had a healthcare provider who was talking about how they always thought they wanted to be in the ICU, kind of like a competitive, higher prestige, quote unquote, environment. When they tried it out, they were like, you know what? After a few weeks, it's like, I can tell this is just not for me. No worries. I'm going to go. And then kind of went to something, quote unquote, less prestigious, but then ended up, that was the thing that made their career and took them to the stratosphere. So did you feel any kind of way about like, well, I always expected like, yeah, I'd be hard news, but then I pivoted. Like, was that natural and easy for you? Do you have any advice for people who like get to the thing that they thought it would be, then they got to swap?
Yeah, honestly, I've always been the type of person who when somebody would ask me what's your 5-year plan, I never had an answer for them because every time I tried to do something that I thought was in my 5-year plan, I quickly realized that's not actually what I wanted. And I think it's because, there's a lot of societal pressure to know exactly what you want to do, when you're in college and you're in school and you're picking your major and then knowing exactly what you want to do when you get out of college. And so that's something that I learned. I did have those moments where when I first graduated, I'm like, okay, I want to be on a syndicated morning show in a top 5 market. Well, then I realized that I don't want to live away from my family. And so I pivoted into something different, right? Starting to do social media stuff. And I will say the social media rise that has happened, specifically in the past 4 years, has opened up a lot of doors for me to stay local. I live in Cleveland, and in 2018, if you wanted to be an entertainment reporter, you had to live in LA or New York, and there was no other option. If you wanted to work, and be a name at E! News or Access Hollywood, and those jobs were extremely difficult to get. And I tried to get some of those jobs. And I went through the interview process and never got any of them, right? So I think there's just something powerful in taking your career into your own hands. And, now I feel like it's just, I wouldn't want it any other way, being able to work for myself, being able to make my own schedule, being able to travel whenever I want to. I have a very, complicated family dynamic where my husband's family all lives in South Africa, and we like to spend as much time there as possible. So I, along this journey have just realized that my main goal isn't necessarily a career goal in the aspect of I want 1 million followers. My goal is to be able to do what I love, support myself and my family doing it. And as long as I continue on this path, that's in my control. And I'm the one who controls my own destiny when that is the end goal.
Totally. I mean, when you look at the FIRE movement and things like that online, that's financial independence, retire early. It's not about retiring early and then, I don't know, eating bonbons all day for the next several decades, but it's really this idea, I think, at the heart of what you're getting at, which is that you have a lot more freedom. You have that financial independence and the ability to call a lot of your own shots in your career in a way that I think, honestly, those of us who don't have that, that's the dream. That's the fantasy for a lot of people, kind of the end goal. Would you say that you're the type of person, though, who always was good at rolling with the punches? Or do you remember, I'll speak to on my end at first. So every time that I really built up, okay, this is what I think I want. This is what I think the 5-year, the 10-year plan is going to have. And then when I get there, and if it's not right, or if I don't get X or Y or Z, when I was in my 20s, pretty much my entire 20s, it was devastating. I'm 33 now, so I'm not that far from my last devastation. And it can really be heartbreaking, I think, for some of us who are overly dependent on I was married to my 5-year plan, and it was not a good one, and it did not work out in real life, And so is that something that you've always been good at? Were you able to gain that skill rolling with the punches?
I was not always good at it. I felt the same way. I guess I was just young and naive, coming right out of school and thinking that I was going to, get my dream job, and you're told 10 times more no's than you're ever told a yes. And I just didn't see, how all of these desires would come to fruition. I knew what I liked. I knew what I was good at, but it still took time and took work, and the no's still hurt because, like I said, when I first got out of school, so being a content creator full time and being able to make income from that was not really a thing unless you were this huge YouTuber. So I was still, like I said, looking at those E! Newses, Access Hollywoods, and those jobs, are few and far between. Even getting a job on a morning show, local morning show, when you really think about it, for example, my former company had 4 stations, and the most people that was on one morning show at a time was 2. with a producer. So when you're in the mix trying to make your resume stand out when there's really only two positions, and most times radio hosts, they have long-standing careers. That's how you build an audience. That's how you build this following. So even to get jobs like that was very hard. And I just had to learn that the baby steps actually get you to where you are supposed to be, and the lessons that you learn along the way. Like I said, I never started doing social media thinking that I would be able to turn it into my full-time job. But those baby steps, being able to see how I can increase my revenue streams over time has all led me to this point where now I'm thankful for the no's, because if those had been yeses, I wouldn't be in the position that I am right now.
I love that so much. And I'm just amused because I think yesterday at the hospital, some of the ENT team, we were just talking about like, I don't even know, guys we dated at 20. Like, so, again, I have a lot of notes for my 20-year-old self. And so a couple of us were talking and I was like, oh my gosh, and somebody kind of applauded me. They were like, you're doing pretty good. Like, I'm on my first marriage. And they were like, you do okay for yourself. Like, you have this like second marriage energy, even though this is your first husband, which I totally agree. But and they were like, so good for you. Like, you didn't marry the wrong guy. And I was like, only because the wrong guys didn't want to marry me, which is just sheer luck. And like that got me down like the Garth Brooks, like unanswered prayers type of like line.
Right.
I was like, yeah, no, that's really great. But a lot of these bullets that I dodged were not because I had the wisdom to dodge them. It's like, it was a no or a rejection in some form. And it took me so much time to see it as a gift in hindsight.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, yeah, not to get too philosophical or talk about like, questionable people we dated back in the day. Well, and I guess I know that you mentioned some really cool lore in your case is that you did marry your first love.
I did, yes. After spending 7 years apart from each other, which is kind of crazy.
How did you guys meet?
So we met when I was in high school. I was a senior in high school. He was a freshman in college. So we were in the same town. I live in Ohio now. I was living in West Virginia at the time, but my husband's from South Africa. He was on an athletic scholarship. He was playing soccer. And my sister and her friends had been running around with, some of the soccer boys. And my sister actually met them all first. And she said to him, I think you and my little sister would get along really well. So at that time, I'm 18, he's 20, about to be 21, and we met and we did instantly like click right away. We were just best buds. But we also knew that he had already made the decision he was not going to stay in the US for school. So like I said, he was a freshman. We met in February. So the semester ends in May. So I knew we only really had 3 months to, run around together and whatever. So we never even really like defined the relationship. But it was pretty clear to us and to everybody around us that we really loved each other. We just didn't want to admit it. So at that point, still very young, we were in no way, shape, or form ready to do a cross-continental long-distance relationship when I was 18 and he was 21. So we went our separate ways and we didn't see each other for 7 years. I went to college, dated other people, graduated, came back home, started working. He lived in South Africa for a little bit, ended up moving to London to get some other job experiences that presented themselves to him. And one day he just texted me 7 years later asking if he could come spend the holidays with my family here in Cleveland, which some people are like, what?
Hard
like,
lunch.
Why would you do that? Yeah.
Kids these days would never.
Right. My mom and my family, they loved him too whenever we were all in West Virginia together. The soccer players would come over. My mom would cook them dinner. It was one of those things. So we were like, yeah, sure, no worries. Now I'm 25, right? And everyone's like, Morgan, you are going to fall back in love. And I'm like, please, like, I'm a different person now, thinking I'm all mature and whatever at age 25. And literally we saw each other at the airport and it was over. We were like, oh God, here we go again. And it was like no time had passed at all, even though we hadn't seen each other in 7 years. And we've been together ever since. We just celebrated 1 year married in October.
Oh my gosh. Congratulations. Yeah,
Thank you.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, we almost made it on a reality TV show of our own. The producers for 90 Day Fiancé, because I was also talking about our immigration journey on my social media pages. And a week after David came in on his fiancé visa, the producers from 90 Day Fiancé were like, we love you guys. Do you want to be on the show? And I was like, well, he's here and we're getting married like next week. So I think you guys missed your opportunity.
Oh my gosh, I would have just hidden the visa. I would have been like, we're in.
Yeah, so we missed out there, but it all worked out.
That's wonderful. Well, seriously, happy 1 year.
Thank you.
That's really beautiful. One question I have, and again, like we're always trying to basically learn from experts. I think that the skills, the repertoire that you've built up over really a increasingly long career now, even though you're still young, absolutely. We're both still spring chickens. Like, don't worry about us if you're listening. Like, we're still young. But my question is, the skills that you have now, especially some of the softer skills, which not only, some of it's just being able to like take a story and tell it artfully in a way that captivates people and also is understandable to them. As you can imagine, this is like a common issue for physicians. Like sometimes some doctors, like they understand it perfectly, right? Like they're a genius, but they cannot explain it to somebody else in a way that is going to make any sense. So, I mean, like that in itself is a skill, but also I think some of the softer people skills and kind of like professional development type of stuff that we get no formal training in. And I'm sure, I don't know how much training maybe on the broadcast journalism side back in the day that you got formally, but it's like, how did you make that transition from radio into really who you are now? Because I think of them as pretty different because first of all, radio doesn't have like a video component.
Mm-hmm. Well, now it does, but when we started, it didn't. Like now, if you're not doing those types of things, it's all about, keeping relevance and agency. So now a lot of radio shows do film their entire morning show and they'll like put snippets out on social media. But honestly, the biggest thing for me was being able to communicate effectively. And that's something I learned, like my freshman year of college. People think of broadcast journalists and they think you have to talk into your TV producer voice, and they think that there's this different persona, but it's actually the opposite. Whether you're working in TV or radio or doing social media, you want people to think that they're talking to you, right? You want to be conversational with them. You want to talk to them the same way that you would talk to the people, at your dinner table. So that's something that I really worked on, during my time on the morning show. It's like the worst thing ever, but every single Monday when I used to work in radio, we would have to listen to our whole show back with my boss, which like, oh my gosh, if you just listening to yourself back, I think is like one of the worst forms of torture ever. Than to have your boss sitting across from you and then he'll like stop and be like, so what could you have done differently? It's just like really horrible, but it is a great way to hone in your communication skills and to get better at just being direct and to the point, while also adding your own personal flair. There are a million Instagram accounts out there. There are a million TikTok accounts out there. And no matter if you're using it for business practices for pop culture and entertainment, or you have your own baking business, people want to know you, right? They want to know, and I know like the authenticity cliche is so overdone and overused, but it's true. Like I said, there are a million businesses in the world, but people connect with who you are. So that's something that I really try to emulate in my podcast and on my social media.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, and just so that I can get a gestalt of the overall amount of time spent doing that. Can you remind me? So like those Monday morning reviews, sitting there, listening back with your boss, like how many Mondays was that? That was
Every Monday
multiple
for
years?
6 years.
For
Yeah.
6 years, every Monday for 6 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that is incredible. And we always think about like the literature says, whatever, 10,000 hours to be an expert, but that you logged a lot of time, I guess, doing that practice. What's funny, and I'll tell you for comparison, like in medical school, when we first learn how to talk to patients, there are these like teaching sessions with patient, there's simulations, and then there's like the live patient actors where they're just civilians being paid to come in and, pretend to have a stomach ache or whatever. And we can come in and do our exam, practice history taking. And a couple times they will video those encounters, which absolutely, I mean, it's like the most brutal thing I've ever seen. And because you're watching the video of you trying to like have a normal conversation and you're like perched on a stool weirdly, like everyone's just kind of like being very strange. It's stilted. You ask your questions, then you do like an exam, but you're not really used to mashing on people's abdomens yet. So
Right.
We probably do that. Definitely not more than, for sure, not more than half a dozen times. And I'm talking ever.
That's why I didn't even know that you guys had to do that. That's pretty crazy.
Well, but you would think, honestly, I'm kind of like, should we have trainees do that more? Because again, you can imagine, I mean, like at some point you're going to be an independently practicing resident physician, doing these exams, and then certainly a doctor on your own. And like, not everyone innately has these skills. That's totally fine. But what's interesting is like, so number one, not everyone innately has them. I don't know to what degree anybody innately has them. Number two, we don't deliberately teach it. That brings me to number three, which is that if you don't take time and really deliberate effort to teach them to yourself, you'll just never learn them. You'll like always be this like doctor with a strange affect.
Yeah, that my boss, I mean, if I hear one thing in my mind that my boss would always say to me is it always was about reps. Like I'd be like, well, why can't I do this? I've been doing it for 3 years. You don't have enough reps. You need to keep doing more reps. Like, listen, this, you need more. So, I mean, you can never have enough, right? And like I said, it's got me to this place where I'm confident in my delivery. I'm confident in my opinions because I feel like I know how to deliver them without being a jerk, which I think is like another big thing that I really try hard to do on my page, and it resonates with people.
That's so true. Also, a skill that we all need.
Some of us more than others, I think, but yeah.
Yes, absolutely. One thing that I thought was so interesting and kind of like can relate to, or that is similar between what we do, is almost this idea that it seems like you are effectively on call a lot of the time, like in the nature of your work. And I know that, you mentioned, of course, like even if Morgan's Pop Talks took like a short break over the holiday recently, like I am, I follow you, I'm a fan, and I know you were posting about the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni drama. So what is that like for you? Like, do you feel like you're on call 24/7, 365?
I do. And it's hard because you do want to be able to, sit down at the dinner table and have dinner with your husband. I feel like I'm better about it now where I'm at a place now where I feel like people, not to sound like too egotistical, but people wait for my takes now. Where when I first started, I had to be the first one with a take, if that makes sense, to kind of get in the algorithm or whatever. But now that I've built up a following, I don't have to be as quick to post something unless it's breaking news, right? Unless it's Paige and Craig have broken up and I need to, whatever. It is a bit of a issue like in your mind, because especially now that there are more entertainment, content reporters out there, where if somebody doesn't get their news from you, they'll get it from somebody else. And that is something that like is really hard for me to let go of if I'm on vacation and something happens and I'm not the one to, be there. But I mean, at the end of the day, like it's not always going to be you. And as long as you continue to put yourself out there. And like I said, if I miss something, the way I'll differentiate the news is by adding an opinion if I have one. So it's something that's taken a lot of time. I mean, when I first started and I saw that somebody got something out before me, I would be so upset about it. But now it's okay now.
Yeah, and I imagine that that's kind of like Sisyphean because there's like so many people online and everyone is trying to run and break this story. What advice would you have for like any young listeners we have, right? Like impressionable young women who are having difficulty putting themselves out there. Again, in a way where I think that you professionally are really putting yourself out there, like in every sense, routinely.
Yeah, it's hard. It's honestly one of the hardest parts about it. I was just talking to my friends about this yesterday because one thing that I really struggle with being, a social media personality is that no matter what my intent is or, how I feel I'm presenting something, people don't always receive it the way that I intend it to be received. And that really bothers me. When I think that I'm giving an opinion and I'm not speaking negatively about somebody, and then I go to the comments and they're like, why are you being so negative? That sends me into a spiral. And it's really a struggle for me to like get back on track. Like when it happened to me this week, I had to put my phone down and not go on social media the rest of the day because it just bothered me so much. But I feel like even though that has happened recently and it has happened a lot, my friends gave me great advice, saying you're not going to be able to please everyone. And how somebody else interprets something actually it doesn't really have anything to do with you. You know your intent and your personality and how you want things to be received. And that's all that matters really at the end of the day is where your heart was when you were putting this stuff out into the world. And if people get it, they get it. If people don't get it, they don't get it. But also it's so cliche, but it is true. You're not going to be for everybody. And even though I try to be as even keeled as possible, I'm not going to be for everybody. And I just had to become more confident in myself, in thinking that what I'm saying is interesting and that people are going to relate to it. So I know it's corny and I know it's cheesy and I know it's always the answer, but it is to just be confident in yourself and come from a good place.
Yeah, that's very true. I think that what is tough for me is the idea that like I'm a very good compartmentalizer. So, for instance, if I post something and then I walk away, honestly, people could say whatever they want. And I think I'd be pretty good. What's difficult then is the piece of trying to engage with anyone, because then that's opening the can of worms. Like, I truly think I could just walk away and like live my day happy as a clam. But if someone was like, well, now you got to engage a little bit, then I'd go in there and I'd be like, well, I guess I have to find something to engage with, which is going to inevitably mean that you consume maybe some harsh or unfair feedback or things like that. I mean, is there a secret to it? Does it maybe get easier to see the way that listening to your own voice gets easier to hear?
No, I hate it. It's the worst part. It really is. And I stay so far away from the comment section. It's not even funny. Like I know I'm supposed to be in there engaging, but it's really difficult for me sometimes to, get in there. I feel like if I know that it's a bit of a lighter video and a lighter take, then I will kind of go in and see. But also for the most part, if something comes up on my notifications, you know how there's only like a specific amount of notifications it will show you. If I'll see somebody be like, what eyeshadow palette are you using? I'll like respond to those types of messages without having to actually go into the video and comment on other things. But I do see the occasional comment that is like, kind of giving it back to me a little bit. And I've also learned, recently that it's never really as bad as you take it. Same thing like I was saying with the intent. I feel like anytime that there's something, not even negative, but maybe a different opinion on the internet, you lose all context, you lose all tone. So you don't understand, where people's intent is when they're writing these comments back to you. So I've learned that, if you see something and it bothers you, like it happens to me all the time, I'll respond to them in a way that isn't combative, right? Because I don't want, it's just clear that we're missing each other here somehow. So I need to relay the information, to the best of my ability without also the other person on the screen being like, oh, why is she being like combative towards me? I was just saying I don't agree. So, try not to take it too seriously. At the end of the day, like I run a celebrity and pop culture account. It's not that serious. So I have to remind myself of that a lot.
Yeah, but I mean, I definitely do think, and going back to what role I think quote unquote gossip but really like entertainment reporting plays in a society is like, some of the stuff, these stories are like not as simple. It's not like just fun tea. Like some of this stuff is reflective of like bigger and more interesting things going on in society that have like greater implications. So I do think all of that. And what's so funny is I feel like even this week, I had to take a moment. This was in clinic, but pretty similar to what you're describing in the comment section, where literally, and this is such a common conversation in clinic, which is that we advise people not to use Q-tips. That's the PSA. Don't put Q-tips in your ears. And honestly, also don't put them in your nose, because I have a lot of patients who do stuff like that. And it's like, they don't belong in there. They only cause trouble. Like they're helping zero amount, and they can cause a variety of things, including like staph infections of your nose, swimmer's ear, otitis externa, earwax impactions, right? Like all those types of things in the ears. So it's such a fight. And I like what you're saying though, this is a skill. And so I have just practiced a lot, and I feel very facile with just kind of saying, I advise against Q-tips. And they can be like, no, I love them. Like, I'm going to use them to dry my ears after a shower. And I just say, you don't need them to dry your ears. I'll show you the ENT approved method, which is where you take your pinky and you put a washcloth or a paper towel or a Kleenex wrapped around the pinky. And then you just take your pinky and you can dry the whole external ear conchal bowl basically up to the meatus that way. Like that's the ENT approved method. And people will sometimes, not always, but like sometimes they will just get so riled up and they're just sitting there like vibrating and they're like, I gotta dry my ears though. And I say, I am saying this to you non-judgmentally. Like literally I said that to a patient a few days ago because they were getting so worked up and they were vibrating. I was like, I truly, like I say this non-judgmentally, I would advise against the Q-tips, if you use them, also no problem, do whatever you want. Yeah. And that's really the tone, like certainly when we're dealing with adult patients, 100%. It's like, do whatever you want, but I am going to give you the information, and my recommendations kind of neutrally.
Yeah, you can't ever control somebody else's reaction, which is also something that I've learned. I can only control how I speak, what I say, my tone and delivery, and how I respond to them. How somebody reacts, especially behind a phone or a keyboard is like none of my business or concern.
Absolutely. Do you have any tips or tricks, ways that you recenter though after events like that? I mean, you even mentioned it happened earlier this week where you were like, yeah, I'm not going to get into this right now for the rest of the day.
Yeah. I just remind myself that for every negative comment, there are however many good comments. It's such human nature to hone in on that one. I was going through my podcast comments on the YouTube today, and there's like 30 comments, and it's all just people engaging in the conversation. There's one comment that just says unwatchable. And it's the only comment I remember, from the 30 that I read of other people that were engaging in things. And so I think it's okay to be a human. It's okay to have emotions and reactions to things that hurt your feelings. Like I'm not a robot and things do hurt my feelings. But at the end of the day, I also remind myself anytime I feel like that, it doesn't actually really matter that, the bot, Ellen Sue, thinks that I'm unwatchable. There are 2,000 other people that watched it and hopefully enjoyed it. So that's just, I've had to learn not to put too much weight into things that really don't matter. And the comment section really doesn't matter in the long term.
Yeah, I think that's such a healthy perspective on it. And I definitely, I think any one of us who works a job that has to deal with other people, does well to kind of remember this, just the non-judgmental, like I'll give my expertise where that's my job. And yeah, exactly. Also, the other half of it being what you alluded to, which is like the letting go. I just cannot control other people. And I can run myself absolutely ragged trying to.
Yeah. Yep.
So, as we're winding down here, I did want to know what you think the future of pop culture reporting will look like over the next 5 to 10 years, kind of the continued evolution here.
It's kind of like scary to think, isn't it? I don't know, because it has shifted so much to the digital age. I mean, hopefully for somebody like me that is beneficial, because like I said, the jobs at all the big outlets aren't as, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're still great jobs and I would still love to have any of those jobs. But it's like, if I don't have that job now, it's not the end of the world. I mean, I think also we'll see what happens with the potential TikTok ban and how that would affect things as well. For me personally, I've been very diligent on, not putting all my eggs in one basket, which is why I continuously am on Instagram, and I started posting on YouTube and have a podcast and a Patreon. But I think just what the future looks like in terms of it is more freedom and flexibility, and, people carving their own path, which is, like you said, it's the goal for a lot of people. So hopefully we can continue on that path.
I really love that. And I think that what you've done is a great example of this, but the point being that there are a lot of us out here where the dream job, it's hard to really put a finger on because it doesn't exist yet. So it's like this thought that you can make your own dream job. You can create that job.
Yep. Because nothing is ever as good as you think it is, Not everything that glitters is gold until you actually walk the path that you're on or whatever, and get there in the journey, right? I would have never known that this was what felt most right to me up until this point. I also think when I'm 45, am I going to want to be talking about Craig Conover and Paige DeSorbo? Like, probably not. And things are allowed to evolve, and your wants and your goals are allowed to evolve with you. So I think for me, it's always just been about keeping an open mind and following your heart.
Yes. And to piggyback on that, no experience is wasted. So even if at 45, okay, it's not Paige and Craig anymore, which I guess it isn't now since they are over, but people are going to still be talking about them probably when we're 45. But, it's like all those skills, okay, well, they transfer with you. So I really like to remember that, or at least I keep trying to forget. And then I remind myself of this fact.
Yes, I agree. I'm with you.
My last question, I ask everybody, do you believe in karma?
Okay, I don't know if I believe in karma, but I believe that you get what you give. So I don't know if karma is the right word to call it, but I think if you put bad energy out there, you're going to receive bad energy. I think if you give good and positive energy and are a good human, then good things will come back to you. I don't know. Do you think that's technically karma?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not like an academician. I'm using it in like the Taylor Swift karma sense of
Right. Yeah, sure.
That's great. Well, Morgan, thank you so much for being here with me today. It's been such a privilege and a joy to chat with you. Cannot wait to see what 2025 and beyond have in store for Morgan's Pop Talks. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
You can find me on social media at Morgan P Talks. That's YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. My podcast drops every single Thursday. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, including watching on YouTube. That's Morgan's Pop Talks. And then my Patreon as well is patreon.com/Morgan's Pop Talks, daily episodes there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Promising Young Surgeon. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, and keep striving to make an impact. If you'd like to submit any questions for future episodes, email me at pys@heyinfluent.com.